So welcome to episode 1 of our Mindful Connections podcast, and I'm delighted to say we're joined by Chris Gillan here today. So Chris, thanks for coming today, really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.
How does it feel? What's your definition of uncomfortable?
I'm absolutely comfortable. This is not an issue. I'm happy to get involved and support what you're doing. So.
Great, and like I say, you have a incredibly inspirational story, Chris, because like I say, both you and I, we know each other quite well, and I'm really delighted you could come here today and share your story. Thanks. So to start us off, Chris, we're going to look at your time in the armed forces. So I wonder if you could just tell me a little bit of your time in service, please.
Yeah, I'll give you the condensed version. So my military background really stems from childhood. My father served with the Royal Fusiliers, so I was actually born in a military hospital in Germany, and then spent the early part of my life travelling with the regiment, and actually went to the Royal Caledonian Boarding School for a couple of years before we settled in Edinburgh. So I think the appetite to join the military was there really from childhood and given my past experience. So initially I actually joined the Army Reserves when I was 18 and spent about a year and a half with the Army Reserves before joining the Royal Air Force Police. So I joined the Royal Air Force Police in 2001. My original date was actually 2002, but obviously 9/11 happened. And,
yep.
Those dates got changed several times, and I got fast-tracked, and before you know it, I was off to start my basic training. So I joined the RAF Police, and I arrived at my first unit in 2002, and soon after that, obviously, the Iraq War and Afghan War had started. However, I initially spent my first part doing covering the fire strikes in the UK.
Okay.
Rather than being deployed. So I was actually kept in the UK, retrained as a firefighter, and deployed to the streets of Gainsborough, where I operated as an enhanced trained non-specialist firefighter. But then eventually went on to deploy to Iraq for the first time in 2004, and again 2006 over the Christmas period into 2007. This is both occasions at Basra in the air base, and then in 2008 I then deployed with the SAS to Afghanistan as part of an Afghan police mentoring team. So it was effectively a 1-year secondment where we trained with them before deploying and then deployed for several months, and eventually brought my career to an end in November 2010.
I think I'm quite familiar with your story, Chris. So I think we've both worked in the veteran sector, and I think what really alarmed me when I was working in the veteran sector was the amount of times that ex-servicemen and women would have to leave the armed forces due to an injury.
Sure.
So I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about the change in mindset, because I guess for you it was a rapid change in mindset. Some think about it for maybe a year, 6 months, but for you it was instant. Yeah,
so for me it was actually not quite straightforward. So I sustained an injury back in 2008 as part of the selection process with our RAF Police Close Protection team, and this was a selection process to be chosen to be seconded to the SAS as part of this Afghan police programme. But the injury at the time wasn't quite realised how significant it was, and would later come back to cause me problems when I returned from Afghanistan. And it was actually when I was nearing the end of my 9-year contract, and I was actually offered an extension as well as other things as part of a kind of opportunity to kind of further my career and develop my career. But I'd made a conscious decision by this point to leave on the end of my 9-year contract. But I was undergoing medical treatment for my injury. Mm-hmm. But because the fact I chose not to extend, I was discharged with the injury, and this had huge implications on the transition for myself.
Sure.
So,
and in terms of preparing for that transition, what were you providing any support through the unit or the regiment before thinking about making that big change?
Yeah, I think it's very common once you hear the story many times. I think once you reach that point where you've made that conscious decision to leave, I think apart from obviously your close colleagues, the mindset is that you're probably no longer of use to the armed forces, and there is, I think, some places that probably work better than others, but I think the support wasn't as good as it could have been. Okay. But there was support in terms of career transition partnerships and the opportunities for enhanced learning credits to use for training programs, developing your CV, and that whole kind of resettlement process that the military take you through. And that was helpful. It was helpful, but I believe it has improved since. And it served the purpose. I think it wasn't perfect, but it certainly helped with that initial stage.
And you touched upon another topic there, Chris. You talked about the reaction within the unit, within your colleagues. Was that quite a profound change within most of your colleagues, or was it maybe the guys on the ground, or was it the commissioned officers? Was there a change in attitude towards you?
For me, it was slightly different because I relocated in my final year of service. So I had moved from pretty much what was a Lincolnshire posting. I'd basically served in most of the units in Lincolnshire, so RAF Warrington, Cranwell, Scampton. So when it came to my final year, I was relocated to RAF Lookers, and this put me closer to Edinburgh, where I was planning to move back to at the end of my career. So I arrived into Lookers with the fact that I was in my last year, and I think it was very evident from certainly line management that that not so much dead wood, but you were kind of, you weren't really. There was no long term for you, so there was a definitely lack of interest in supporting you with anything that you were doing, because you were not really there for the long term. So there was a noticeable change in terms of the way the management treated you as a person. And
I think the perception is at times, CTP, career transition pathways is a great thing that's in place, but sometimes it can be a little bit limited or short-sighted in many cases too, that it's very much focusing on that short-term plan. But I'm thinking for you, Chris, see when you were just going through that process and you're thinking about, maybe going back to Edinburgh, was there an overall plan at that stage, having gone through CTP? Did you have a real clear picture of what you were going to do?
So initially at the time, so I undertook training with CTP. One was with Police Scotland. It wasn't at the time. It wasn't Police Scotland. It was individuals from Tillyalan, and they took us through the selection process for joining the police, and that was my plan. My initial plan was to join the police. They had a fast track program in place, and having given the fact that I just spent 9 years with the Royal Air Force Police,
makes sense, yeah,
and the wide range of experience I had, this was my kind of chosen path. But the plan was to join the local police force at the time, Lothian Borders Police, now Police Scotland, but also to join the reserves. So I would still have that military connection, because for me, I really enjoyed my career. And the opportunities it gave me, but I made a conscious decision as well to leave, because my daughter stayed in Edinburgh, and to be closer to them, that was one of my influencing factors. And I undertook these training packages with CTP, and I also used my enhanced learning credits to do project management courses. But unfortunately, when I left, the injury would impact my ability to pursue these careers. So especially with the police, because you had to do a fitness test, and I went from obviously training at a very high level, especially having worked with SAS, to not being able to do very basic fitness stuff because of my injury.
Indeed.
So that put me in a position where I had to rethink my career path, but I was still in the process of trying to get treatment for my leg with the NHS.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess too, it had an impact on your plans for the reserve too, then, I suspect.
Yeah, basically put a stop to that.
Put a stop
to that, unfortunately. So it was. When I was at the time I was discharged, I was being told that basically with some treatment it should recover, and that was the kind of the long term view. So I left with the view that I would have to go through this training, the rehabilitation process, and eventually I would be able to get back on track with my plans. But unfortunately, that wasn't to be. So.
Absolutely. And I think moving on, so we've talked a little bit there about the kind of the preparation that went in there, Chris, the many plans you had. So if we can move towards making that actual change. So I'm wondering if you could just share your sort of memories of that first day, Chris, as a civilian.
Yeah. So there's a little bit more to that story. So at the time I was leaving, I actually had a property which, having grown up in the military, my father served in the military, I always had the mindset, try and buy a property and invest in a property whilst you're serving, so that when you leave, you're in a better place. Unfortunately, I planned to do that, but the property I had was at RAF Scampton.
Right.
And this actually flooded in the process of being sold. And the downside was, because of the fact it was in the process of being sold and the insurance was due for renewal at that same time, I thought, the property's going to be sold. There's no point in renewing and paying for another year's insurance. And unfortunately for me, the property flooded when it wasn't insured. So by the time I actually left, had left in financial ruins and homeless. So just before I left, I had to approach the local authorities, which was Edinburgh Council, which I was reluctant to do, because I think when you're in the military, you're very proud, and sometimes asking for help is not always easy. No. So I took that decision, and I thought, I need a foundation to build outside the military and start my life, and I need a home to do that, and also somewhere for my children to come and stay. So I reluctantly approached Edinburgh Council and basically advised them that I would need housing, which unfortunately at the time I was advised to stay in the military because they would give me a house, and why am I leaving the military, which was a bit bad taste from my view. But eventually I got a property, and I was given a property in Edinburgh, in Leith, and this is effectively where I started my life after my career. But in terms of my first days, it takes a while to realise that you're not going to get a phone call, because it's so used to, especially during my 9 years, I've done so much and been to so many places, and there was always something to be done, and it took a while to realise that there was no more phone calls.
No.
There was no more, we need you to do this, or you need to get ready to go here, or we're going to send you on some training because you're going to be going here in several months. So you very quickly realise that that's you. Mm-hmm. You're on your own. You need to start making plans, and whatever happens tomorrow is based on what you decide today. So
absolutely,
and that was the hard reality. Especially given the fact that I had quite clear plans as well, and these plans were being altered based on my injury and external factors that I had no control over. So that made it more challenging than it perhaps could have been.
And so you've talked there about a real strong sense of realization, but then you're also talking about that adaptation from very, very, very sort of strict routine and rules and protocols to basically now you're on your own, and you're having to find a whole different pathway now and set your own sort of routines, and no longer these phone calls telling you what to do. So I'm also thinking too that when you left, Chris, did you feel a real sort of acute sense of loss, because you've talked so much about you come from an armed forces family, you served in the forces, you live and breathe this. Did you feel a real sense of loss of belonging? To
a certain extent, yeah. I think nowadays compared to the olden days, when my father left, you left, and that was it. Unless you made a conscious effort to keep in contact with people. But I think in today's world, we have things like social media.
Yep.
So it makes it very easy to keep yourself connected to that community, and in some ways that does help. So, but yeah, I think that, I think when you leave the military, you may leave the military, but the military is very much within you. It's part of it becomes part of your DNA, and including all the experiences. It's wars come and go. And for the general public, these conflicts, will become part of the past. But for those who serve in them, it's part of their everyday. So
absolutely.
So there's a lot of this kind of stuff that it just makes you who you are at that time. So yeah, but there was, to some extent, you start to miss the structure, and especially when you start going into the civilian world and you realise things aren't so robust, so structured, and disciplined or clean. And you start to, that adaptation to a new world, effectively. I think one of the funniest things I remember is sending emails. And in the military, sending an email, you kind of expect a response that day, even if it's a response to say out of office back in 2 weeks.
Yes.
And sometimes you're sitting waiting, 2 or 3 weeks for an email, and you're thinking, this is not great.
You usually get that kind of, I'm sorry, I saw your email, but I forgot to reply. Whereas that just doesn't happen, does it?
Exactly. So there's always little things like that you have to get used to as part of the civilian world, which is very different.
And I think having worked with several veterans through my own work, I think something that came quite common was that at times when they'd found their accommodation and at night it was very quiet. And I think, basically a lot of people struggled with that. And that's, for some, it came that real realization point that they had left the armed forces was when that silence at night. Did you find that kind of same thing where there's that kind of silence, whereas, when you were sort of living in the barracks at times, you were always around people sort of 24/7?
No, I mean, for me, it was quite the opposite. I've been living in bases in the countryside and stuff, and it's been quite quiet at night time, obviously, apart from when you're deploying overseas. But it was the opposite because I moved into Edinburgh. And
right, okay.
The property I was given was right on a main road. So
fair enough, fair enough.
You had the buses, and it was getting used to that kind of the noises of a city around you, and that was quite unusual. So it was the opposite for me.
Okay, and we talked about previously there, Chris, you were talking about finding accommodation. So I'm interested too with regards to managing finances, and this is a topic that comes up a lot with Forces Children Scotland through our family support service. And many of veteran families are telling us that they just don't simply have that preparation and that education. So did you feel that when you left the armed forces, you had a real appreciation of how things are different in terms of managing finances?
So I based on my father's experience, I'd been conscious of that during my career. Hence the reason why I'd bought a property when I was serving, with the view of investing in a property whilst in my career. Unfortunately, it was the fact that the circumstances changed out with my control with the property flood, and I was left basically in financial ruins because I had to spend several £1,000s in basically getting my property back on to a condition that I could sell it. But then we were at a time when the recession kicked in at the same time, and it was just a sequence of events that kind of led to very unfortunate circumstances,
Sure.
which then led to me kind of homeless and in financial ruins. And when I was given the property, in terms of preparation before, there's certainly no education in terms of preparation for people leaving the military. Certainly not when I was there. Whether there is now or not, I don't know. But for myself, it was the situation I found myself in. I'd been quite independent whilst I was serving, hence with a mortgage, and so I knew that this is something I would need to control and maintain. But I had plans to do that, and that plan was to join the police and have this very my view at the time was a very smooth transition into a very similar career in uniform, and doing something very similar in terms of the civilian world, working within the police. But when all this was taken away from me unexpectedly, I was left in a situation where I didn't really know where to go from there. Mm-hmm. And I actually did have to reach out to the Armed Forces charities to get financial support for the property I was in, because we were living in a property that had no carpets, no curtains. We didn't even have a shower. We were having to use buckets to wash our hair, and at one point, it was one of the worst winters we'd had, and it was minus 24 outside, and we had no central heating. So it was a very brutal transition.
Absolutely.
At the time, but yeah, so thankfully the Armed Forces charities are there, and they stepped in and gave us the support we needed just to get the fundamentals to get out the property and make it more of a kind of home, and that helped kind of start that process of effectively recovery from a sequence of events that put me in a very difficult and dark situation.
No, thanks for sharing that, Chris. Really appreciate that. So I think it was really pleasing to hear that you managed to find that support from Armed Forces charities, which is fantastic, which I think it's sort of suggesting to me that kind of set a foundation, would you say, to think about the next steps. Would you say that's quite correct?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it made the starting point more comfortable, if you like, to start to build from. I think given the situation that I'd gone through, I'd effectively reached rock bottom.
Yeah.
You go from a successful career, and I'd had many sort of high points in it, and a very enjoyable career. And I made a conscious decision to leave, and when all your plans, fall apart, just having that safety blanket that there is organisations, and a lot of the veterans will be reluctant to ask for help. And to be honest, I was the same. I think the only reason why I asked for help was because my partner was struggling with the conditions. I think for me, if I'd been by myself, I probably would have just roughed it and tried to see myself through it. But I think given the impact on her, that was the kind of the foundation and the kind of deciding factor to reach out and get that help. But the fact that it was there made a big difference. If that hadn't been there, and I was trying to support her, I think chances are she probably would have given up at some point, But so yeah, it was the charities provide a good support network.
And did the support extend to the sort of education, employment, and skill side of things as well, Chris, or was that something you took on your own?
Yeah, I wasn't made aware of that side of things. CTP were still involved, I believe, for 2 years. I didn't really find the stuff I was getting from CTP was very helpful. When I had realised that the police was looking like it wasn't going to be an opportunity because of my injury, I turned to some of the other courses I undertook, which was my Prince 2 and project management courses. But very quickly realised that unless you have a skilled profession to apply that to, finding employment within project management was very difficult, not unless you were prepared to once again travel, which
Sure.
At the time I thought that was kind of, contradicted my reasons for leaving the armed forces and being closer to my daughters. So I found myself in a very difficult situation. And I didn't ask for help in terms of employment. I spoke to CTV a couple of times, but I found I was kind of being pushed towards very basic jobs such as security, which had no interest for me. So that was, I went for a bit of a journey, which then led to me effectively starting my own business. And that was really off the back of the support I got from the charities. And effectively I started a social enterprise with the focus on giving back to the military charities.
And it's an incredible story, Chris, and it's one I know very well. And I think I've remembered, catching up with a cup of coffee with you in your offices at Rosyth Dockyard at the time and seeing on the board all the product development ideas. That's and right. The branding. So could you tell us a little bit about Heroes Drinks Company?
Yeah, so as I said, Heroes Drinks Company was really founded off the back of my personal experience, my personal journey. When circumstances changed, unexpectedly, and I found myself in a situation where very quickly I was having to rethink my direction. I looked at the demand on the charities, and I think when you serve in the military, you don't quite realise how many people these charities are supporting. You agree to give X amount of your wages every month to the charity, to the charities, but first of all, you probably never think that you're going to be the person who's going to need that help.
Yeah,
I certainly never thought I would, because I'm quite strong-minded and I'm quite driven. So, but circumstances out of my control, I turned to them, and I'm glad they were there to support me. But when I went through that process, I could see how many people were helping. I think this one charity that year alone had spent 18.5 million supporting their community. And what you don't quite realise is that this is for veterans as far back as World War II.
Absolutely.
They still need support. They have injuries that might require assistance as they get older in terms of the care that they need, or the development of the property to make adjustments to make it more suitable. There's so many things they do, and this inspired me, and I knew that this was something I wanted to, in some ways, being proud, give the money back that I'd received. But I'm also, this is now 2011, and I'm thinking of the fact that we had plans to withdraw from Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was very aware of the fact that with that would come reduced media exposure, and with reduced media exposure would ultimately lead to less funding for these charities, despite the fact the demand on these charities. We just finished I think it was a 15-year campaign in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, and with that, a lot of people with injuries and potentially psychological problems to come. And we need the support. So for me, it was about developing something that would, one, give back to these charities, two, help to maintain awareness of the work they do, and three, potentially create opportunities for other veterans that found themselves in my situation, because my injury was, on the grand scale of things, minor. I've got friends, obviously, who have sadly lost limbs in conflict, and so I don't feel justified to talk about my injury, but at the same time, although it was minor, the impact it had on my life was quite significant. And there's many veterans who leave and find themselves in the same situation. So the idea with the company was to try and create something that would create some opportunities for veterans, or at least awareness as well. So and that's the reason why I founded Heroes Drinks Company. So Heroes Drinks Company itself is basically, it's a premium alcohol company, and the concept behind it is that we produce these products to a very high standard, and then we sell them. Some money goes back to the charities. and not just military charities. We gift products to charities for raffle prizes and stuff, and we do this for non-military charities as well. So we do support the wider community, but our focus is the armed forces community. And yeah, we've basically been working on and developing that over the last several years.
And it just sounds like the perfect fit for yourself, Chris, because you were talking about, the fact it's clear that the armed forces and veteran community is at your core. You're getting to support other veterans through your social enterprise, and there's a real passion for high standards there as well. So it kind of just sounds like it's the perfect match for you. So interesting too is for me, Chris, as someone who's teetotal, I have no idea about the intricacies of creating the perfect vodka, the perfect gin, or the perfect rum, as you now have as your products. Can you talk me through the process? Because I think you clearly understand the project management side of things and the standard, but was this something on your radar before thinking about this concept? Was this like in terms of mixology and all this stuff? Was this something you thought about?
Yeah, no. I mean, I didn't realise you were teetotal, but the good news is we're potentially looking at alcohol-free gin. So
okay, there we go. When that cordial. Yeah.
But no, the journey was actually quite challenging. I think you take that mindset from the military that if there's a problem, you look for the solution. And sometimes you maybe simplify these solutions. And the journey for me was actually through a friend whose family business was in wholesale alcohol in the Midlands, and I was looking to replicate that in Scotland. But the unique selling point for us was going to be a website where customers could go on and order online. And we started the journey on this, but then the web development took longer. And whilst that was under development, I decided to look at the products available. One of them was a vodka product, which very quickly became unavailable. But this was a good quality vodka at a reasonable price, and I thought, let's try and resource this. And at the same time, I'd been doing some work helping a local Polish French polisher with his business. And just in conversation, we talked about vodka, because obviously this is a drink that's commonly drank in Poland. And they would talk about how they used to make it at home. And so this very quickly became, okay, well, why don't we look to try and produce our own vodka? And so we started to develop the concept, and initially looked at the idea of distilling ourselves, but then realised with no real investment, this was going to take a lot of money, which we didn't have. So we then went for a process of trying to find collaborative partners to work with. And so we did. So we did this, and we kind of, at the same time, when this was all going on, I was sent a painting that was produced for my deployment in Afghanistan. And it was titled Heroes. And this was when we were talking about the name for the product. And I said, it's Heroes summarises what it's about, and who it's for. So that was kind of where the name came from, and it was all part of this process. But then we developed it over a period of time, and eventually had a kind of finished product that was done on a very cheap budget by 2013, which we launched at the I think it was the 20th anniversary of the Royal Logistic Corps.
Right. Okay.
And this was just a tester. This was for us to kind of test the market, test the interest, and try and really learn about a sector we had no knowledge of. And that's what we did. We went upon a journey and started to travel to different military events and just testing the concept, and we were getting a good response to it. But when we were sitting down with people like supermarket buyers and these type of individuals, the feedback we were getting was this was a black bottle we used initially, and they didn't like the black bottle. Okay. They said that vodka should really be in a clear bottle. And that they wanted some of the information to be clearer, and so we took on board some of that, and we took a step back and went through a rebranding process, and this is when I kind of learned the importance of storytelling and the importance of storytelling of a brand, and I met with an organisation called Parkhouse Agency in Edinburgh, and they had basically discussed doing some work for us pro bono, free of charge. They just wanted to support the concept and the cause, and so we went for this whole branding process where we sat down. They asked me lots of questions about the backstory, and they said, look, you need to be the story of this brand. You know,
Absolutely.
for me, I'd launched this product saying, look, this is who we are, this is what we're going to do, and I thought everyone would support this just on the basis of this alone. I was slightly naive at the time. I had no business experience before this, so this was all a new journey for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they dissected effectively my backstory, the product, what we were trying to achieve, the charities we were working with, and came up with this multiple different designs. And then we just went through this process of picking out different key points about what we liked, what we didn't like, until we refined it. And some of it was challenging because they wanted me to put my name on it to kind of tell people this is not a big company, this is a veteran-owned brand. And
Absolutely.
I sat on that for about 2 months because I wasn't sure. I wasn't comfortable having my name on there because, especially the fact that it was in the same part of the glass where it said heroes. You know, for me, it's like, you know, I'm no hero, but this obviously represents people who I perceive to be heroes in the community, and make a lot of personal sacrifice. So that was the development process, and eventually we came up with this final design. And included some little secret messages that are on the bottle. So yeah. And,
right, okay.
And then before we even finished this rebranding, we'd had an opportunity to speak with the buyer from Asda.
Yeah.
And effectively, we secured national distribution with Asda before the product was finished.
It's incredible, isn't it? It's an incredible journey.
Yeah, it was. It was fantastic. It was a long journey, but yeah.
But you just think of all the different strands that you've contributed there, Chris, combined with that drive and passion to support the armed forces community. It's incredible. And does it ever I can imagine when you look back on it, it must give you a great sense of satisfaction.
Yeah, I think sometimes when you don't quite realise what you've done until you sit and talk about it.
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
I think you're always focused on what's next, where you go from here. And I think a lot of the mindset, the skills learned from military, you know, have certainly, you know, stood me well in this process, you know. And I think, there's been a lot achieved. Am I happy? Do I feel like I've been successful? No, because I'm not where I want to be.
Okay.
I've had some success, but I don't see myself as successful. You know, it's there's a lot more I want to do. Unfortunately, things have evolved and changed, and you have a sense of direction in one way, and you're always learning. You know, I think especially when you start a business and you're not used to business, you have to learn many things, and you know, I think certainly for myself, I've learned so much about marketing, sales, you know, financial side elements of the business, and you know, all these things. There's been so many things to learn as part of this process that all really contribute towards each other and support each other in business. Mm-hmm. And that's been probably one of the biggest things I've taken from this journey. No,
it's an incredible inspirational story, Chris. It's incredible. And I think everybody would be interested to know too, it's not necessarily your full-time job either, Chris, because you have a second job as well.
That's right, yeah. So since 2017, so effectively when we developed the business, as I said, my concept, and it was to try and create opportunities for the veterans. We had a veteran who'd been doing some voluntary work for us. So I chose to basically sacrifice taking an income from the company and focused on developing it and giving opportunities to other veterans. And so I took on some work working for the Home Office in immigration at Edinburgh Airport. So from time to time you'll see me in there doing my second job. So.
Absolutely, it's incredible. And I think just moving on to the next subject there, Chris, I think we've kind of touched upon it lightly in the previous sort of sections, but if I can I talk a little bit about mental health and well-being?
Sure.
And I think it's clear from working with Forces Children Scotland and other veteran charities that making that change can present some very unique challenges to mental health and well-being, but it's very individual. If you're really comfortable with that, Chris, would you be comfortable sharing? Was there any challenges that you face with regards to mental health and well-being?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you say, it's very dependent upon individuals' experience. You know, many people, you know, join the armed forces, their career path, their exposure to what they do in life is very different. And even at that, you know, you can have several people experience the same thing and react differently. For me, I think there was maybe some underlying issues that, you know, I certainly at first when I left and I had this injury from the armed forces, in some ways I actually felt somewhat abandoned because I had an injury which was caused by the armed forces, and I was keen to get medical support to basically make sure I was fully fit so that I could continue on my kind of chosen career path. after the armed forces. And for me, I felt it was too easy that I was discharged and told to speak to the NHS and still suffering with an injury, which was then impacting me beyond
absolutely
my time in the military. So yeah, there were some very low times after leaving, especially when you combine that with my property flood. But then, the property flood would have been fine on its own had, I had this natural transition into a full-time job with the police, because then you're still, receive income and you kind of focus on your career. But then when you're taken out of that environment and your choice and your career path that you've chosen is now, a roadblock. You can't go down that road, because of your injury, and you're still trying to get the medical treatment. That made it probably more difficult than it should have been. But then I think as well, there is an element of time in the military. You're working in volatile situations. Where you're in the military, where you're effectively putting your life at risk, and I think that was probably one of my biggest frustrations, that knowingly having done the jobs I've done and knowing the potential risk of those jobs, and including, understanding that may also include that, you sacrifice your life. So I think that for me was the biggest challenge when I left, was the fact that you do that, but then when you leave, that is not acknowledged, and you don't get that support to say, right, okay, you've got an injury caused by service, we'll do everything we can to support you in your recovery. And I think that was the battle I had when I transitioned. So you then combine that with this process, plus the financial situation, plus the housing situation, plus the response I was getting from the local council about, when you stay in the military, they'll give you a house, and it was pretty poor treatment. I think when you leave, you're not looking for the red carpet. You're not looking for and I think, like I said before, a lot of veterans will not find it easy to ask for help. But I think at the very same time, you think you at least get something to support you. So for me, I found that very challenging. And during that journey, and sometimes still, you have those kind of dark moments. But for me, I think in some ways, building a business that's still connected to the armed forces with purpose, it kind of replaces that sense of purpose that you have when you're in the military. And I think in some ways that's why I've done what I've done. And that's been a long journey over the last 10 years.
No, it's incredible. And thanks for sharing that, Chris. I really appreciate it. It's not always easy, to talk about these kind of topics.
No problem.
And I think we were talking off camera there about the sense of camaraderie that kind of comes up when you least expect it. You were talking about sometimes you're getting a taxi journey, and all of a sudden you realise he's a veteran, and then you're having a bit of banter, and sometimes a free fare, which is always a bonus, Chris.
Of course.
But I think you said that earlier on, that once you're in the military, you never leave, really, in many ways, and there's always these nice little rays of sunshine there. But equally too, do you have any links with ex-service groups, communities, or associations?
I have done, and I dipped my toe into things like the Veterans Breakfast from time to time. It is a like-minded community. And you do find once you go into these kind of communities and surround yourself with individuals like this, especially things like Remembrance Day, when you go to Remembrance Service, and it's like an extended family. You meet with individuals, and very easily you engage and start talking and have this kind of mutual respect towards each other. And then sometimes you start to hear about some of the war stories, but I think because when you're talking to people who understand what's been said, and they know you understand what they're telling you. You get these little moments which are quite unique, are quite unique, and I think the veteran community as well. You see a lot of within the veteran community. I support the veteran awards.
Yep.
I've been involved in supporting and keen to support them from since the early stages, and recently joined the board as a judge for that. So I try to support the community, and I'm always keen to be involved with the community as much as possible. I think more recently I've taken a bit of a step back and tried to focus on my personal life, because it became a bit too much at one point, because the business and everything that I was doing was always around the armed forces, and so more recently I've been kind of stepping away from that and still trying to focus on the business, drive the business forward. But I've been doing some stuff in more recently with supporting other charities, including doing some recent charity work in Ukraine. So.
Fantastic stuff. And you'll be pleased to know we're on the homeward straight now, Chris. Okay. So the next topic is just looking back on this whole process that we've just talked about here, Chris. And I'm wondering if we could go back to the point where you're just about to leave the armed forces, and what advice would you give to your former self?
I think for me, it stems before that day you leave. I think when you join the military, you're obviously young-minded, young at heart, and you enjoy the process, and that includes the socialising, which is always good. I think socialising is good for that kind of camaraderie. But I think maybe advice to take advantage of more of the opportunities available in the military. There's so many opportunities out there. Certainly when I was serving, that was the case, and that could be adventure training. It could be development courses. They do exist. Not everyone's very aware of what is available.
Sure.
But for me, it would be to take advantage of that, because there's so many things you can do in the military that really support your career after the military, but in terms of your personal development. But then in terms of the transition, I done my project management courses. I didn't do much research into what sort of project management I'd be interested in. Sometimes these courses come along and it's a big package sale. Look, you do this and you get these courses, and it sounds all great at the time. But the reality is sometimes the reality of what you're doing and what you're studying may not always align with life after the military. So maybe spend a bit of time to research what you really want to do and what courses will support what you want to do after the military, and use your networking after the military. Find the breakfast clubs, find business networks for military, and get involved, and because these will open up opportunities and maybe give you some ideas as well.
And equally too, maybe as well, sort of really follow your passions maybe in civilian life, because it's certainly for you that seemed to work quite strongly. Would you say that's something too, that maybe research potential avenues where you could really focus on a passion? Yeah,
I don't think it's one size fits all. I think for most people, you maybe leave the military with an idea of what you want to do. I think until you actually get into the civilian world and you actually, the vision of and the idea sometimes doesn't always match the reality. And I think this is where you'll also find the transition for some, where they'll maybe job hop, to multiple jobs over the first few years of leaving. I don't think it's clear cut in terms of exactly. Some people do. Some people know exactly they've got experience. If they're an engineer in the military, and that's a kind of role they want to do in the civilian world, then that tends to be a natural progression. Some people want to go from that to a less stressful role. But I suppose if you can identify your strengths and weaknesses, and if you can find a job you enjoy doing, that's going to be, I would say, fundamental to your success. Because if you enjoy doing what you're doing, and you get out of bed in the morning to go to do your job and you're happy, then
makes a difference.
That makes a big difference, So, but sometimes you will have to, job hop to find that. It's not until you get into a position and do the job that you realise what it's truly like, and whether or not you actually enjoy it and the lifestyle it gives you.
And I think it's really interesting, because I think that journey is seldom straight. It's a seldom straight line, is it?
No, it's exactly that. It's not a straight line. It's and you have to be flexible. I think sometimes as well, and not just from personal experience, but also from, because we've run several work placement programs. If you're interested in a sector that you've not done before, volunteer. Volunteer to go in and do 2 weeks unpaid work, and get experience, because you're achieving two things. One, you're getting experience, and two, you're building your network in that sector, and an understanding. So that can, some people think, I'm not going to work for nothing, but the reality is if you're interested in working in a sector or getting experience, sometimes it's helpful just to get that little taster, and then you can use that to build from. So.
Absolutely, and I think it's something we haven't really touched upon, is the fact too that you're also studying, Chris. And I think sometimes maybe for some of the younger ones coming, leaving the armed forces at the moment, they might not be thinking about the education. It might be the sort of short-term employment opportunities that you talked about. So I think equally too, it's really interesting that the SQA have just started to look at all the various courses that non-commissioned ex-servicemen and women have done, and how that equates to SQA points, and it could provide pathways to college and university. So is there any sort of thoughts on that with regards to maybe encouraging more to think about that route?
Yeah. I mean, I think look at all opportunities. for myself, my journey into academic studies really was off the back of my years of building a business with no prior experience, and an opportunity came about to go back to university and study business management, which tied in. For me, it was more about cementing years of experience building a business, because I understand business now, but this is more in depth, and it also gives, the idea is it gives me the kind of accreditation to support what I've been doing, but also broaden my knowledge of business, and help me to obviously look at things, maybe the bigger picture more clearly. So for me, it served a purpose, and so there's so many opportunities for study out there, and I think looking at that and seeing how that can develop, and I would never be too scared of starting a new career. When you leave the military, even if you serve 22 years and you're early 40s, you're still young. I know many people who even have gone on to study law, become solicitors, after several years of studying, and they have a very successful career. But yeah, it goes back to that, finding what suits your lifestyle and your interests. So
great. No, thanks for that, Chris. And just final question. So I think at the moment there's somewhere in the region of about 220,000 veterans in Scotland, and I think 50% of that equate to veterans over 65. But when you look at the veteran strategy within the UK at the moment, they are expecting a real gradual change from the over 65s to younger veteran families who need much more complex support needs, whether that be community and relationships, education, employment and skills, health and well-being, finance and debt, making home and civilian society, and much more. So I'm just thinking, just in closing, what would be one piece of advice you would provide the men and women leaving the armed forces right now with regards to making a successful transition to civilian life?
I think for a family, it can be so diverse in terms of the challenges that they'll face, and individually unique. You'll have military spouses who will have a profession, so this might be easier, but I believe there is more and more support for military spouses, as well as those actually leaving the armed forces. So to me, it's just about take advantage of what's out there. Doesn't mean that everything that's offered is going to be useful to you, but at least look and see what's there, and do that well before leaving the armed forces, because when you're in the armed forces and you have that safety blanket of accommodation, regular income, that's the best time to be planning ahead, and so that the more you plan ahead and the more you prepare yourself and look at where you want to live, the employment opportunities in those areas, and start that transition soon, it makes it easier that when it comes to the time of actually leaving and you step across the line from military life to civilian life, that preparation will help that transition a lot smoother, just by doing that bit of homework and a bit of preparation and planning. For children, it's always going to be challenging. You're moving schools, but I think in the military, as a child, you get used to moving from school to school. I believe more recently, certainly for the regiments, they don't tend to move around as much. So a lot of that would depend on the family's decisions as to whether or not they stay local to where the regiment is and settle in that area, or whether they move back to where they're originally from. And that will have challenges as well. And I haven't been a child in the armed forces, that is challenging, and there's not a huge amount you can do about it apart from embrace the change and hopefully get support from your parents to get settled in, and meet people in the community, and whether it's moving schools, continue your education system elsewhere, these all provide challenges. So it's difficult for each family member. They all have their own unique challenges to deal with, but.
I think it's great too that, because you mentioned that there's much more support for spouses, but equally for children and young people, there's support at Forces Children's Scotland as well, through whether it be education, learning, mental health and well-being, family support, making important transitions, and much more too. That's
great, yeah, and these are the things that I don't think were available certainly when I was younger. So these are great opportunities for the children to use, and for the parents to help them look at and take advantage of, for sure.
Great. Well, that concludes our episode, Chris. So once again, really want to thank you for sharing your story. Thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me along. So